Sunwolves Super Rugby preview for 2019. This is a pretty important year for the Sunwolves. It is World Cup year, so the eyes are already on Japanese rugby. Sunwolves could certainly do with a competitive year, especially the way Super Rugby is, Sansa are looking at Super Rugby in terms of the structure and potentially dropping a team. You feel like the Sunwolves are one of the teams in the crosshairs at the minute. So we'll have a look at the squad, have a look at their fixtures list, and some kind of key points for them. A few question marks as well, because it's still early days as I record this video. The squad is not settled, but yeah, we'll see if any further news comes out about who's going to be playing. We'll start with the squad though. There's a few additions and a few guys back from last year. There is a bit more consistency about the squad this year. Props, you got Avalu, Inagaki, Ku. There's Ku Ji-won, but I'm pretty sure people call him Ku. He's got a Korean name. Craig Miller and Van Veek. These are all the players from last year. I think Craig Miller was one of the top minutes getters of the Sunwolves last year. He even captained the side once, so it's good to have a settled front row. Their scrum wasn't terrible last year. It was more the line-out that was struggling, but they've also signed, and that's the reason I got the Blues jersey here, Poliasi Manu from the Blues, Sam Prattley from the Chiefs, but a former Blues man, and another Chiefs connection. They got Yamashita, played a season for the Chiefs, Japanese international. So I would say, if anything, perhaps the propping ranks have improved a touch. Hookers are the same as last year, with the Georgian Brigvadza, Japanese international Horie, Niwai and Sakate. Second row, I think there's only one addition. It's still Grant Hadding, Jimeno, James Moore, the Australian, and a new addition from Otago from memory. It's Tom Rowe. Hutting is some proper tall timber. They ended up playing him at 6 at least once last year, but Hutting I think is going to be another key man. I said the same thing last year. They need to get him as their kind of key lineup jumper, along with some other guys like Leach. But yeah, a proper tall timber lock is a fairly key factor in rugby these days. Most teams have got a guy above 2 meters, so Hutting needs to be that guy for the Sunwolves. He did have some injuries, so hopefully he can stay injury free. Loose forwards, again, some familiar names. They've got Labuskakny, who's an absolute tackling machine. It's a real pity he only played, I think, the first half of the season for the Sunwolves last season. He had to go back to his Japanese club, but he was one of the, I think if you do it on average tackles, he was perhaps the top average tackler per game for the whole of Super Rugby, but he didn't play that many games, so it's kind of hard to judge him over the whole season. Eddie Quirk's still there, the Australian. Van der Vault, who plays a bit of lock as well, as another option. Vosiyako and Michael Leach, who will probably be captain. At least he's captain for the Japanese side. He's a proper, is he world class? Very, very good number 8. New additions, and again a bit of Blues connection. They got the 2 Pryor brothers, Dan and Kara. They got Hendrik Tui, and they've got Mark Abbott. So they've definitely added to their loose forward ranks as well. Like I said, with some of the other positions like the props, that's a pretty good depth building piece there. In the backs, you got scrum halves, and there's a fair few of them. You still got Nagare, who played as probably the first choice number 9 last season for the Sunwolves. Former Highlander Tanaka. He perhaps looked a slot or a touch behind Nagare in terms of his performances. He's not getting any younger, but he is definitely a familiar name. Shigeno Uchida, and the new signing is Jamie Booth from the Canes. He's a very solid signing. Top player. Surprised he didn't get a Super Rugby contract in New Zealand. Number 10, Hayden Parker returns. He was the top kicker in terms of accuracy last season. Kicked an amazing drop goal to win. Was it against the Stormers? He was a proper clutch player for them last season, so he's a fantastic guy to have still around. But he's the only kind of specialist number 10 that I could find in their squad. There's also Matsuda, who I believe plays a bit of 10, but I'll leave it to someone else. Perhaps the Imbiber can give us some more information about that. I'll link to his channel. He is definitely a Japanese rugby specialist. Other midfielders, Jason Emery still there. Michael Little, who was perhaps one of the best midfielders in Super Rugby last year. He led a lot of stats, including like turnovers. He was a good tackle buster, offloader, Absolutely key guy. He had a few handling errors, but I think for what he gives you, you can definitely justify the odd mistake. Really high work rate. Very disappointed he doesn't play for the Blues, because he was in the Blues, I think, won a trading squad at one point. Had an absolutely outstanding season for the Sunwolves. Very good player. Like I said, there's Matsuda and there's Nakamura. In the outside backs, you got Fukuoka, who is an absolutely top winger. He's a small guy, but he's got gas. He runs good angles. If you've seen a guy like Batista Delgui for Argentina, Fukuoka, kind of a similar style player. You don't necessarily have to have a big guy. You can have a little guy, and he is a very, very dangerous player. So I'm happy to see him there. Jamie Henry from Memory Japanese International, good player. Lamano Lemeki is back. They've signed Rene Ranger, so that's another good addition, another Blues connection. Lemeki was very good last season as well, formed a pretty good partnership with Salmaki. And Vanden Heerva, who from memory had one really calamitous play, or a couple, gave away a couple of tries, but then ended up scoring a try last season for the Sunwolves. So yeah, there's a fair few new names and a fair few non-Japanese names, which always gets raised as an issue. But part of that may be, from what the speculation I've read, is the Japanese national team want to do well at the World Cup as they can because they're hosting the comp. It's kind of an important thing for them to do well. So it may well be that a lot of the Japanese national team players are away with the national team during Super Rugby, doing like training camps or something like that. So they need to bolster the numbers in the Sunwolves of guys who can play, focus on the Super Rugby season. So that may be what they're doing here. So I guess that can kind of alleviate some of the criticism that's going to come in against having the Sunwolves in the comp, is that there is a reason for it. And they want to do well, so the guys they are bringing in aren't kind of the dregs. They are, a lot of them, tested Super Rugby players. How does their fixtures list look? Well, theirs is a season of twos, pretty much, because the Jaguares and the Sunwolves are always going to have a pretty raw deal with the travel because they're not based amongst any of the other teams. They can't just do the domestic trips down to Dunedin, down to Christchurch like the Blues can. They can't just, up to Canberra or Brisbane for like the Rebels. So they're going to be experiencing a fair bit of travel. And their whole season is pretty much home, away, home, away. But the thing with them is they have two homes. None in Hong Kong this year, but they do play 2 games in Singapore. So you got the Sharks first up in Singapore, and then Waratahs at home in Japan. 2 away games, Chiefs and Blues, so that's the trip to New Zealand. Home to the Reds and Lions, but one of those is in Singapore. Away to Australia, Waratahs Rebels, and then they got a bye. 9 weeks until they get a bye seems like a pretty long time for a team which traditionally doesn't get a lot of prep time. I know they are going to have more prep time this year because they adjusted the top league schedule. I'm not sure if it was just for Super Rugby, but also for the World Cup. So they're going to get more of a preseason this time than they did last year, which was like a couple of weeks. So it's going to be at least a semi-proper preseason for the Sunwolves guys, which should prove crucial because they really improved over the course of the season last season. I think they went 9 games losing, and then they finally picked up 3 in the second half of the season. So once they'd worked out their set piece, all their set plays, and got that kind of team chemistry, they actually proved okay. But the season was already dead and buried by that point. So I would have liked to see the Sunwolves have a bye earlier than the 9th week, but hey, that's what it is. 2 New Zealand teams at home in Japan, another trip to Australia, another bye. That seems kind of sensibly placed. 2 games at home in Japan to Australian teams, and then 2 games away, trip to South Africa and to Argentina. So I guess you can't complain too much about the Sunwolves schedule, as sensible as it can be for a team which, like I said, doesn't have any immediate neighbours. I would have thought it would make more sense to play 2 games in Singapore in a row, but maybe they think people won't turn up for 2 games in Singapore in a row, or perhaps they just had to give those games to the South African teams because I know South African teams aren't that keen on going to Japan. The 2 games they've got in Singapore, week 1 the Sharks, week 6 the Lions, so that alleviates a bit of travel for those 2 teams, but it seems a bit funny that they have to jump from Japan to Singapore twice. But yeah, the teams they avoid, the Crusaders, that's a pretty good one to avoid, even though the Sunwolves played well against the Crusaders in New Zealand this year just gone. And the Bulls. Bulls didn't do that well last year, but they've had a few good signings, so perhaps the Bulls are a decent one to be avoiding. Last season was 3 wins and 13 losses. One would hope they can improve on that with all the additional players and with the extra training time together. I hope it can be a thing. Question marks I've got still at the minute, is Sean McMahon going to play? The last I read, and it may come out before I release this video, that he's provisionally signed for the Sunwolves and it's kind of waiting on an injury to clear up. If it clears up, he will play, but if not, then he will not. Jose Salmaki, I'm not sure what's happening with him. He was in devastating form for the Sunwolves in the weeks that he played. He was one of the top stat getters of all the kind of outside backs in the comp. Timothy Lafaele, he was a regular appearer in the midfield for the Sunwolves. He's not listed in their lineup. Yu Tamura, one of the Japanese first fives who's like we've seen in Super Rugby anyway, like plays for the Japanese national team. He's not on the team list. Willie Britz, he was everywhere for the Sunwolves last season, almost the face of the Sunwolves, and he's not around. Tokunaga, who was a bit of a tackling machine. There's a few question marks. I'm assuming these guys aren't going to be playing, but it's been sometimes a little bit more difficult to find information on the Sunwolves exactly who is in and who is out. But they're not named, so I'm assuming they're out. Questions for the Sunwolves for 2019. Can they avoid the wooden spoon? They are predicted by the bookies to get last. They are the 15th favourite to win Super Rugby by a long way. Can they win away from home? I know they managed to win in Hong Kong, perhaps Singapore, which is kind of a half away game for them, but it's a home game technically, so it'd be good for the Sunwolves to get an away win. Can they improve their defense? Because their attack was not actually that bad. I think it was the 11th best ranked attack in Super Rugby last year, so the defense needs to improve. How are all these imported Kiwis going to settle in? That will be interesting. Like I said, they've got more time this year. Can they sort the set piece out? And how is Tony Brown going to go as coach? He was assisting Jamie Joseph last season. He was in charge for a couple of games towards the end. He's done a stint with the Highlanders before, so there's no reason he shouldn't have them operating at optimal efficiency, but it is still a question mark. So my expectation for them, I'm hoping it's better than last season. I would like to see them avoid the wooden spoon just to kind of prove some of the doubters wrong. I still think there can be a place for them in Super Rugby if they do give them the appropriate time to prepare for the season, and if they do keep some consistency in players year on year. So semi-optimistic, and they also, I would like to see them not get blown away in those games where they go behind. A few times last season, they got beaten by a lot of points because once the floodgates opened, other teams just really ran away with it. So hopefully we won't see that happen this season. Hopefully it'll be competitive, if nothing else. Maybe a few losing bonus points if they're not going to win. But yeah, you guys let me know your thoughts on the team, how you think they're going to go, and yeah, I'll talk to you again soon. See you later.